This is chapter 9, part 3. We're going to move on to endospores versus vegetative cells. Um, Bacterial endospores exhibit the greatest resistance to pretty much anything you throw at it. I've already mentioned this a couple times. The destruction of the endospores requires temperatures above boiling. So if you are um, boiling baby bottles or something like that, if for some reason those bottles have been exposed to endospores, then the boiling in the pot of water on the stove is not going to kill those endospores. Not that we necessarily have to worry about that because it's not something that's necessarily found, hanging out here and there and everywhere, but anyway, the bacterial endospores exhibit the greatest resistance to pretty much anything we try to kill it with. Vegetative cells are the cells that are not in the endospore phase or the protective coating that I mentioned when I described what an endospore was. The vegetative cell is not the dormant state, it is the living, doing its thing cell. And these vegetative cells will vary in their sensitivity to heat. The death times and temperatures vary from 50 degrees Celsius for 3 minutes to 60 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. Microbial susceptibility to heat. Vegetative cells of endospore formers are just as susceptible to heat as vegetative cells of non-endospore formers. So what that means is, at some point, the endospore former, the cell that has the capability of making an endospore but is not currently in the endospore phase, that's referred to as a vegetative cell. Those are susceptible, just as susceptible to heat as all the other cells out there that are vegetative, that are not, the ones that are not endospore forming. Pathogens are neither more nor less susceptible than non-pathogens. Fungi, protozoa, and worms are similar in their sensitivity to heat, and viruses are resistant to heat. The tolerance extends from 55 degrees Celsius for 2 to 5 minutes to 60 degrees Celsius for 600 minutes. So, definition of thermal death time is the shortest length of time that we need to apply to a microbe in order to kill it at a specified temperature. Thermal death point is the lowest temperature required to kill all the microbes in a sample in 10 minutes. So heat treatment of perishable substances must render the product free of agents of spoilage, so free of the critters that'll make it go bad, or disease without affecting the speed and cost of processing. So that's things to consider when we are using heat to kill certain microbes. So here we're going to get into the different methods, the specific methods. So we have moist heats. Boiling water is considered disinfection. It is not a way to sterilize. So I'm going to say that again. Boiling water is not a way to sterilize. It is only a disinfection option. And there's some information in here because a single processing at 100 degrees Celsius will not kill all resistant cells. It is only for disinfection. So pasteurization, disinfection of beverages. So fresh beverages such as milk, fruit juices, beer, and wine are easily contaminated during the collection and processing. So because microbes have the potential for spoiling these foods or causing illness, heat is frequently used to reduce the microbial load and destroy the pathogens. Pasteurization is the specific technique in which heat is applied to liquids to kill potential agents of infection and spoilage, while at the same time, it's a kind of delicate dance in this process, at the same time retaining the liquid's flavor and also the nutritional value. So steam under pressure, autoclaving. So this is how we would sterilize certain things. So specifically heat-resistant materials, glassware, surgical dressings, metallic instruments, certain liquids, paper, some media, and some heat-resistant plastics. So heat-sensitive items such as plastic petri dishes, we could put those in there, but they're kept in a bag and then we dispose of them. Um, so, yes, 15 pounds. This is what I mentioned earlier, 15 psi. So, 121 degrees right here. This is what we need in order to um, achieve sterilization in under pressure is 121 degrees for 15 minutes at 15 psi. So remember that 121 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes at 15 psi allows us to achieve sterilization in the autoclave. So other methods, incineration, like flames or a Bacti incinerator. I have a picture of it coming up. Hot air oven. All of these are more likely to, depending on what we're trying to do, destroy the pathogens in some way. So you can see here, here's the open flame, there's a hot air oven, and then I threw this in here. This is not in your book, I don't believe. I pulled this off of the internet. This is the incinerator that generally we would use in class, and we put that loop in there to sterilize the tip of it. So going back to this, flame is perhaps the most rigorous of all heat treatments, can reach 1870 degrees Celsius at its hottest point. Direct exposure to such intense heat basically ignites and reduces those microbes and other substances to ashes and gas. Hot air oven basically takes longer. Sterilization requires exposure in a hot air oven to 150 degrees Celsius to 180 degrees Celsius for 2 to 4 hours. I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate these numbers to me. I will ask you to regurgitate the autoclaving numbers. 121 degrees Celsius, 15 psi for 15 minutes. All right, cold, the effects of cold. So, when you think of cold, think of when you put something in your refrigerator and it ends up being pushed to the back of your refrigerator. And 2 months later, you say, oh, I need some more room. And I found this thing in the back of the refrigerator. What in the world was it? And you open it up and it's all kind of funky when you open it, right? It's spoiled, it's moldy. So things can still grow in the cold, right? It's a retarding effect. So principal benefit of cold treatment is to slow the growth of cultures and microbes in food during processing and storage. Cold merely retards the activities of most, not all, most microbes. Temperatures from -70 to -35 can preserve cultures of bacteria, viruses, and fungi for long periods. So most microbes are not hurt or damaged by gradual cooling, long-term refrigeration, or deep freezing. Desiccation is another way we use to kind of preserve things. So vegetative cells directly exposed to normal room temperature and they gradually become dehydrated. That is desiccation. So desiccation is essentially when the water is evaporated off. Some microbes are killed by desiccations, but many others are not, and some are even preserved this way. So a lot of times we'll have, little specimens that come in from where we order them from, and they might be desiccated, but most of the time they are lyophilized. So lyophilized or lyophilization is a combination of freezing and drying. And this is a method of preserving microorganisms in a viable state for a very long time. Because when we order these microorganisms to use in-house, they are fairly expensive, so we want them to last a long time. Pure cultures are frozen instantaneously and exposed to a vacuum, and that removes the water, which avoids the formation of ice crystals. So, desiccation is the drying or dehydrating of a specimen. Lyophilization is drying and freezing at the same time. So, radiation, energy emitted from atomic activities and dispersed at a high velocity through matter and space. Examples are gamma rays, X rays, and UV radiation. So, these are just know the basics here. You don't have to memorize all of this stuff, just know basics of what it is. UV light is lethal from 240 to 280 nanometers. Ionizing radiation, highly effective alternative for sterilizing materials that are sensitive to heat and chemicals. So those are things that I would expect you to know. Filtration is another method to remove microbes from air and liquids. You might have a filtration system in your house. Maybe where you work, they have a filtration machine that sits off to the side, runs, seems like it's maybe just little dull hum. You hear it, and it's really filtering the air. So we can use filtration to prepare liquids that cannot withstand heat, such as serum, blood products, vaccines, drugs, IV fluids, enzymes, and media. Other alternative method for decontaminating milk and beer is filtration, and it is a very important step in water filtration. High efficiency particulate air filters, HEPA filters, are used in hospital rooms and sterile rooms. So osmotic pressure, adding large amounts of salt or sugar to foods creates a hypertonic environment for bacteria, causing plasmolysis. Pickling, smoking, and drying foods have been used for a very long time to preserve foods. This is not a sterilization technique. So I left this in here because I was worried that this would come up on the Smart Book. So I'm not going to go over this too much, but a few terms that you should know. Aqueous is chemicals, or is considered chemicals that dissolved in pure water as the solvent. And then tinctures are chemicals dissolved in pure alcohol or alcohol water mixtures. Okay. So you can read through this. I'm not going to read through this. It's just basic information related to some of this stuff, the desired qualities in a germicide. So things that are wanted when we make up a germicide, these things will be true about it. So high level, intermediate, and low level. Obviously, the higher level, the more probably damaging to the tissues it is, but sometimes it's a necessary thing. Factors affecting germicidal activity. Again, just things you need to read through. Just trying to get through this last few slides here. Use all of this as a reference. I might ask one or two things off of these charts coming up, these few pages of tables. I don't expect you to memorize it, so you have this table available, all however many pages this is, just so you can reference it during the exam or the quiz in case I ask something about it. Chemical strength, dilutions, what basically a little bit in a larger solvent. Let's see, length of exposure, things that affect germicidal activity of chemicals. Length of exposure and composition of the material being treated. So most compounds require adequate contact time. So it might, 10% bleach might need to be applied to it for X amount of minutes for it to actually do its job. And then it depends on what you're treating. That makes a big difference, especially if there's a bunch of organic material hanging out. Interesting information here. Read over this. I always find it interesting to know what's in the stuff you're using, and then a little bit about COVID-19. So that's the end of chapter 9. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to going over in the next one.